Having heard your videos and been in constant touch with you, one could see that the central idea of all your teachings is this. You very lucidly have said, you're not missing the secret, you're missing the obvious. And as we sit here to have a constructive discussion on a subject, I propose that the most obvious here is not us humans, but the space that we occupy, the land that we sit on. And for us humans as social beings, the most obvious today is the phenomenon called global warming or climate change. Incidentally, in the last two statements that one said, one mentioned us humans. The scientists, the researchers, the socialists who have tried to study this phenomenon have said, have averred, and polemically argued that the sole cause of this phenomenon is human. It is an anthropocentric issue. And by the virtue of being in touch with you, one can also understand that spirituality too is anthropocentric. It places mind at the center. Today, this evening, let's talk about spirituality, climate change, and this anthropos, this human. And Udit ji,
all right, what is it that you want to talk about? We know man. We also know this thing called climate change or climate catastrophe. What is it specifically that you would want to discuss?
While going through some articles on the internet and a few science journals, I came across some kind of news which was very much alarming for me. And somehow when I look at the world around, when I look at the social media, when I look at the people having their discussions in the cafeteria, I usually never find this topic there. And I have a few news articles with me, some headlines that I want to...
You mean you don't find them discussing climate change at all these public places, cafeteria, malls and all these places? I think it's very much in vogue now. People are discussing.
Recently when this climate strike thing came into discussion, since last, I guess, 20th September, 27th, this was very much in the news. But before that, people usually...
This has been highlighted recently. But even before that, it's not something unknown or unheard of. People are talking about it. It's not that the discussion tonight needs to be related to raising general awareness on the topic. Let's go a bit deeper into it. See, what is it that you want to understand about it? Let's together explore.
But still, I feel one thing here, that maybe in the public purview, the intensity of the problem, the very magnitude at which it is hovering over us, it's not very much clear.
Okay.
So for example, I was going through one of the science journals and I found a very article from a United Nations Institute, and there they were speaking of that if we actually want to stop some irreversible change happening from climate change, we just have only 11 years to take action.
Okay.
And just after that, I came across a BBC report, and there they said that when we say 11 years, we think as if we have a lot of time. But to achieve that target of 11 years, we need to act right now. And to have those policies intact, we have just 18 months.
Okay.
It is from the time when this article was written.
Right.
So basically, they were referring to 2020. And after that, I also had a look over a letter which was written by a union of concerned scientists, and these scientists were from USA. They had written a letter in 1992 when initially climate change was actually for the first time came into the international debate. And there they wrote an letter, and there they said that if we are not going to take some action, some measures in coming years, then this will be a huge issue, and saving people from those catastrophic disasters would be irreversible and irreplaceable. And recently in 2017, they wrote another article that even after raising that first warning, this time 15,000 scientists came together and wrote that article. And there they said that even after that first warning in 1992, at this point in time till 2017, all the graphs are rising towards the sky. So even when the common man at times is speaking about this issue, or maybe we are having so many summits and so many conferences where we're taking pledge and also talking about cutting emissions and everything, I do not see that very intensity in their daily actions maybe.
So, do I gather from your statements that the phrase climate change has entered the popular vocabulary, the popular culture, yet on the ground very little action seems to be taking place, and even if action is taking place, it is largely symbolic and is not yielding any concrete results. Do I gather this? All right. Yes. So now, what is that want to say?
Even when we go further into this, we'll find that the kind of things that are in the public purview, that doing these things will save us from climate change.
Right. I see a lot of strikes, demonstrations. I see people wearing T-shirts. I see them raising placards. Yes.
There I see that people are talking about things like, maybe having your ACs at 22 degrees Celsius, 24 degrees Celsius.
Right. But that's useful.
That's useful, yes. Apart from that, people will speak of maybe using public transport, and
that too is useful.
Yes, it's definitely is. And maybe they speak of not using plastics, and that is very much useful.
That's nice, yes.
That's also a problem. But even after that, I actually went further into researching, and there is a particular organization which is by the name Climate Action Tracker.
Right.
And according to them, at this point in time, the kind of measures we are taking, it is going to take us to 4.1 degrees Celsius of global warming by the end of this century, and which is totally beyond the permissible limit, or rather the one we are aiming at, 1.5 degrees Celsius.
So what I hear from you so far is this, that the alarm bells were first rung sometime in the later half of the last century. 1970s, 1980s was the first time when some scientists first raised the concern, and since then the intensity of the call from the scientific community has only risen, and it has reached popular culture now, it has penetrated popular media. People are talking about it, teenagers and kids know about it, and yet you see a bleak future. Why do you say so? When everybody is talking about it, when you see people coming out in the streets, holding strikes, having demonstrations, conducting awareness camps. I met a bright fellow. He handed over a pamphlet to me, and it spoke about all the right things. So, isn't it encouraging that these things are happening, and the public at large is now much more aware than it was, let's say, 2 decades back?
Maybe it is increasing, but it is not increasing at the rate the catastrophe is increasing.
Okay. So that's what you want to talk about? All right. So what you are saying is that what is happening really on the ground, beyond all the banner work and all the studio work and all the headlines and TRPs, is very little and very late. Is that what you are saying? Yes. All right. So what is it that you want to now know? Why is it so?
Why is it little and late? Both.
Why is it so little and why is it so late? Why is it happening in the first place? Unless you first want to know why it is happening in the first place, how would you be able to mitigate it? Why do you think it is happening? The whole phenomena of what you call as climate change and the related problems, collapse of ecosystems, biodiversity loss, loss of forest cover, and so many other things.
Do we really need to talk about that, or are we beginning with the assumption that people are aware?
No, I think we need to first of all understand where is all of this coming from, because we didn't see this happening since the advent of civilization. Anthropogenic climate change is a very, very recent thing. Less than 2 centuries old, right? It came along with the Industrial Revolution, and it made its presence felt only in the last century. Before that, there is no evidence, no trace, and actually no global warming. Why is it happening, first of all? Why do we see it happening today?
I find this word very interesting, anthropogenic, because here we are not just talking about this particular emissions that are happening, but also the worldview that we have. Because to us, everything is for our use.
Okay.
So we had industrial revolution. So
Yes.
the major purpose was increasing the productivity, so that maybe the people can be employed. The goods must reach to the masses, maybe in lower cost and everything.
Right.
And right from there, it is simply increasing and increasing. The population is one more indicator towards that. The human population has been increasing since that time.
So, sorry for interrupting. Has something special happened in the last 200 years beyond the mills and the furnaces and the emissions? Something special? Why do we see this thing happening today itself? If it is related to man, do we want to say it is related to man's mills or related to man's mind? We would be tempted to say it is related to man's mills. Since the mills took over, we have started seeing a lot of carbon and sulfur and nitrogen in the air. Do we want to start there, or do we want to go back further? Okay. So it would be very tempting to say that man has been doing fairly all right, and it's the mills that came along the track of civilization and industrial development, and now they are causing this nuisance. But the mind that brought about the mills would surely be able to mitigate the effect of the mills as well. Isn't that tempting to say? So that's one thing. You could begin from where the mills come.
This would be the sociological way of looking at it.
This would be the sociological or structural or purely economic way of looking at it. I want to go further back. You see, who is man? I keep on saying man is a continuous dissatisfaction. Man is a continuous incompleteness. Man is someone who doesn't quite like himself as he is, where he is, what he is. That's how man is. That's how his basic physical bodily constitution is. Now there is a line of thought that does not really encourage man to go into his dissatisfaction or restlessness or incompleteness, rather wants to use the restlessness as an engine of material progress. You are restless for material goods. Go ahead, obtain those goods, obtain more material wealth for yourself, and you will feel better. And then there is a line of understanding which says, unless you know who is going out to satisfy himself via the world, there would be no point venturing out. Don't you first want to know who you are and what your motivation is and where the whole thing is coming from? And then you may proceed with whatever you want to do. Obviously, you have understood we are looking at the Occidental modes of perceiving the self and the world. When the ego does not quite understand itself, then it has no option but to proceed on an outwardly journey. Journey is a very sober and calm word. The ego merely does not journey. It tramples, it devastates, it blasts away everything that comes its way. It wants to be satisfied. In other words, it wants to be happy. It wants to be happy using material. And material has not been known to give the ego or the self lasting satisfaction or happiness. So the result is more and more consumption of whatever the ego can lay its hands on. Some interim episodes of happiness are obtained, and they keep the hope of lasting satisfaction alive. So man goes on capturing, conquering and consuming. What does man capture? What does man conquer? What can he consume? When man looks outside, as his senses make him to, what does he see? If you look here and there, what is it that you can see?
Natural world.
Okay, the natural world. What is it that you can see when you look outward?
You see the material.
You see material. Can you elaborate? What all kinds of material can you see? You see humans, you see trees, you see birds, you see plants. Okay. And obviously you see man-made stuff. So you see man, you see man-made stuff, and you see so-called natural stuff, which I call as prakritik stuff. Can I divide and capture everything that can be seen in these three divisions? Man, man-made objects and so-called natural objects. Is there anything else that you can see? No? So when man wants to consume, he does not spare any of these three from his lust for consumption. It is obvious, right? I am hungry, I am dissatisfied, I want to consume. And I do not know what is it that would appease me, make me happy, quench my thirst. So I'll try out everything. Any guess is as good as any other guess. I cannot just spare anything. It's a matter of deep inner unrest. I have to try out all possible ways. So man tries out all possible ways. Who is this man? Just to put the whole thing together. Who is this man?
Restless man.
This is the man who is coming from a mode of thinking that lays no emphasis on understanding oneself. It is much more concerned about the outer world. And of course, when it is concerned about the outer world, there would be great progress in science and technology, in everything that can be seen outside. So this man is coming from that domain of thought. He will not look at the thing called the ego. He will not look at the self. It's not very interesting and it's tedious. Why look at the self? Also, it is humiliating at times. Especially if you are a philosopher. It is great to philosophize about this and that. But if you start philosophizing about yourself, it doesn't turn out too good. So you want to think about, money, masses, dialectics, nations, communities, modes of production, what not. You want to think about all these things. What is it that you want to strictly avoid? You want to avoid looking at yourself. Firstly, that is not very interesting to the uninitiated mind. Secondly, it can turn out to be humiliating. You can have a lot of grandstanding when you point fingers at this and that and say, I know who you are, I know who you are. There is no grandstanding when you look at yourself and say, I don't know who I am. So, it is a compulsion with this man who comes from that line of thinking to keep proceeding only outwards, and he finds these three categories outwards. There is man, there is man-made objects, and then there are the trees and the animals and the rivers and the mountains. What is he going to do with all these three categories?
Exploit, batter, demolish, use.
Can he spare any or either of the three? Why must he? Why must he?
Try out everything.
He will try out everything because he does not know anything. When you do not know anything, you have no option but to try out everything, obviously. When you do not know where a redemption lies, you will knock at every door. And these are the doors that are available to the man who proceeds outwardly in order to make himself happy. If I am proceeding towards the world to make myself happy, these are the three domains I'll encounter. I'll encounter human beings, I'll encounter animals, birds, rivers, trees, and I'll encounter man-made objects, cars, buildings, clothes, gadgets. What will I do with all these? What option do I have? Do I have an option? I'm hungry, I'm unhappy, and I don't know from where would happiness come. So do I have an option? What am I going to do with all these three? I'm going to eat them up. That's what man has been doing, not since the last 2 centuries, not since the mills came about. He has been doing this since he has been known to be conscious. That's what he has been doing. He wants to eat up everything. Now what is the result then? When man eats up man, the result is population. What is this population? The woman goes out and eats up the man. You have babies. The man goes out and wants to eat up as many women as possible. You have babies. Right? So, from the drive to consume, first of all, come babies when the object of consumption is a human being. Right. The next object of consumption is man-made objects, because they too are available. Why must I spare them? So, when man wants to consume man-made objects, the result is he guzzles up fossil fuel. Give me more diesel, give me more petrol. Where else would the energy come from? I want buildings. I want to consume, and whatever you want to consume has to be firstly manufactured. How will I manufacture it if I don't have energy? And energy from any of the sources, as we currently know, is carbon intensive. Even the so-called green energy has a strong carbon footprint when seen in totality. So, when man consumes man-made objects, again the result is more consumption and more carbon. And then man says, I will consume the natural world as well. Why should these folks roam about happy and untouched?
Maybe they can make me happy.
Maybe they can make me happy. How about some beef? How about more corn? How about turning a great banyan tree into a bonsai? I want it in a little pot. I'll keep it in my bedroom. Are you getting it? How about developing a delectable waterfront by the side of a great river? I'll go there and satisfy my senses. And what is the waterfront all about? Tons and tons of cement. Tons and tons of cement. I'll consume everything. And if you will look at these three types of consumption, you will understand what climate change is in all its totality. Nothing drives climate change except these three. Man consuming man, and when I say man, I mean mankind. It's not a gender specific thing. When I say man consuming man, that gives birth to unsustainable populations. When I say man consuming man-made objects, that is what is meant by, generally meant by the level of consumption. And when I say man consuming the natural world, that is what is meant by loss of biodiversity, excessive fishing, extinction of species, and whatnot. So that's the overall framework. You cannot look at any small part of it. You have to go to the very basis of it. The very basis of climate change is the constitution of man himself. It is not a specific activity of man that is leading to climate change. And do grill me on this. I just don't want to go away untested. I want both of you to question me on this. I would love to have a clearer understanding. But this is my thesis so far. The very constitution of man is such that he is bound to destroy everything. It's just that sometimes he calls his destruction as construction. Real construction is something totally different. It does not come from that line of thought which prohibits man from looking at itself. Real construction or real creativity comes from another mind which, due to the various vicissitudes of history, could never gain enough prominence or power to guide the course of history. That kind of mind has sometimes been found in the Orient, though it is fairly lost now. So, man as he is climate change. So, climate change is not merely man-made. Climate change is man's compulsion. Man cannot help climate change. Man is climate change. If you have this big a hole in your heart, what else will you do? You will use the entire universe to plug this hole. And if you find this planet Earth too little to fill up your hole, then you will proceed towards other planets. Of course, man is the only animal blessed with intellect. So you can do that. You can do that. You can now go and colonize Mars. And you can say, we have eaten away whatever there was to be eaten on the Earth. Now it's the turn of another planet. Gobble it up. You will consume. Why didn't then you see climate change in the entire history of mankind, but for the last 2 centuries? Because man's science and technology were yet not developed enough to show their true colors. Science is not something that happens suddenly. Science is gradual. It is a body of knowledge that travels from generation to generation and scientist to scientist. One scientist stands upon the shoulders of the other, as someone famously said.
It was not about the intent, it was about the capability.
Very right. The intent was always there to eat up everything available.
He didn't have the weapons in his
The
hand.
weapons were not there.
Now the weapons are available.
The weapons have become available only since the last 100-200 years. Now the weapons are being used. Had the weapons become available, let's say by some freak of nature, by some freak of history, at any time over the last several centuries, the result would have been the same. The result would have been just the same. Man is fundamentally an animal and far worse than an animal. An animal is all right in the confines of the jungle. He wants to eat things up, but then he wants to eat only in a limited way, and his hunger is physical rather than psychological. So when a gorilla gets a fruit, the fruit is enough. When a gorilla gets a fruit, the fruit is enough because the hunger is in the stomach, not in the mind. Man's hunger is not so much in the stomach, it resides in his mind. And no fruit is enough when it comes to the mind. So man has been destroying everything he can touch. And climate change is the most recent, the most devastating, and probably the most final symptom of it. Are you getting it? So that's how I would look at it. Obviously, what I have just muttered is far too sketchy, scattered, and incomplete. So over the course of this discussion, we need to improve it, fill it up with details, and take it deeper. But I have a strong opinion here that superficial attempts to tackle climate change are not merely insufficient but are actually part of the problem. And superficial attempts will always be there when the understanding itself is superficial. If you do not understand what climate change is, how will you tackle it? Climate change, I say, is the most devastating, most complete, and the most final expression of who man really is.
Very lucidly explained, Acharya, and that was indeed very radical to those who are involved in the climate strikes that are ongoing right now. If one could scrutinize your thesis statement, basically you are saying that the intrinsic nature of man / humankind / mind is that it is going to be violent to anything that is seemingly an object to it. Am I to infer that you are saying that there is a divide between the inside and the outside, and this journey, which is not really a journey, which is an exploitative journey, is outside, and because it is not inside, hence all of this is happening? So what is the way to really go
lives
inside?
in ideas, does he not? Animals don't live in ideas. Man lives in ideas. Man is his own idea gone wrong. Man is his own flawed idea. The idea needs to be corrected. We don't live a life. If you really see, what we are living out is an idea. And that's why lives differ in the little ways they can, given that the fundamental idea is the same.
So Acharya, can we say that it is out of ignorance and not intent that man is doing all of this? If realization...
Yes, ignorance at the conscious level and deliberate mischief at the subconscious level. It's not that the option to really understand what all this is about, climate change and all the other ills that plague mankind, is not available to man. It is available. But there would be so many who would be switching off their screens at this moment in time if they are watching me.
But Acharya,
this is deliberate mischief. I'm sorry, yes please.
You began by saying that this restlessness is going to ensure that the mind moves out.
Yes, the
it
mind
doesn't have the choice to go inside.
Yes.
So the TV is going to get switched off. It's predestined.
Yes, but then we have had instances in human history, and surely such instances are available even today, when the TV does not get switched off. It's just that those instances are few and far between, and I said they have not been empowered, they have not been privileged, they have never gained prominence, but that is possible.
So what is it that which shows the way inside, which tells the mind to not go outside?
Entering my domain, no? Then it becomes a discussion on core spirituality rather than worldly issues.
Is this divide between the inside and the outside, is it merely a divide of the direction, or is it a divide of ontology itself?
It is a divide of the idea that man holds of himself. Whenever the man will say self and the world, it's all gone wrong already. Whenever man will say self and the world, everything has been destroyed. The self has been destroyed and the world has been destroyed. Now it's a matter of time before the destruction becomes manifest. That's the flawed idea. In my world, we call it duality, dvait. Whenever there are these two, the self and the world, the self will have no choice but to satisfy itself upon the world. There is me, there is the world is both a threat and an opportunity. I must defend myself against the world by rising materially, by fortifying myself, and the world is also a delicious opportunity. Why not exploit it? Why not make the most of it? After all, I'm going to be alive only for a few decades. Is a fellow not entitled to have a good time? Let me have a good time. Give me some steak. Let's burn those jungles. If that makes me happy. And it does make me happy. I want land. I want farms. I want ranches. The moment there is this dichotomy, the self and the world, and this dichotomy lies at the core of all Western philosophy. By that I do not mean that the ones who are responsible for this problem are all philosophers. They are not philosophers. They have just been indoctrinated in philosophy subconsciously. The philosophy of a place is in its very air, is in the vibes. And you just soak it in. The central problem is man's idea of himself. Till man keeps calling himself as an entity distinct from the world, as someone who has come to the world and will one day depart from the world, he is bound to have a hostile and exploitative relationship with the world.
Pardon me, Acharya ji, I'll just take the discussion slightly backwards. From where do you draw this understanding of the man, of this restlessness, of the inner compulsion to go out and exploit?
I just observe.
Do you draw it from self-observation or from the scriptures that...
The scriptures validate what I see. The scriptures too have arisen from observation. It's very easily observable. Every bit of consumption that man does is carbon intensive, is it not? And of the three legs of consumption that I just mentioned, consuming man-made stuff, consuming trees and animals and fish and mountains and trees and rivers, and consuming other men and women. Nobody wants to talk about this elephant in the room, consuming other men and women. And when we take this discussion further, we'll probably be a bit surprised to see that it is this leg of consumption that is the most responsible for the climate adversity that we see and is the most ignored one. Do I call it ignorance? Do I call it deliberate mischief? People talk about cutting down on consumption of air conditioners and cars. People also talk about planting trees and not cutting down trees. But nobody wants to talk about the gorilla in the room. Well, there are many, but the biggest one. Nobody wants to talk about the consumption of one body by another body and the happiness that it seems to bring. And the resulting numbers it is bound to create. And all animals do that. Man is not the only animal who does that. It's just that man is intellectually much more capable. His intellectual ammunition is devastating. So he does that on a scale that is just not possible for animals. Animals too consume the bodies of fellow animals. Animals too consume trees and mountains and rivers. They do that, don't they? But man does that on a much greater scale, and animals feel satisfied once they have done what they have done. Man's problem is, in spite of consuming fellow human beings, gadgets, and trees and rivers and animals on a scale that is 1,000,000 times bigger, he still does not feel satisfied.
I want to interrupt in between. With the entire discussion up till now, you used two words initially, that man is bound to do this if he has that kind of an outlook towards the world, looking at the material world, and also that it is in this very constitution. The moment I hear these two words, it feels like that as if the man who's just looking at the outside world has no capacity to stop at these three consumptions, these three levels of consumptions. But as I move forward with the data and everything, I see that since 1960s, the rate of population increase is decreasing up till now. And it has also been seen that if, especially women, are educated even in the worldly stuff, in the basic economics and everything, it has been seen that fertility rate increases as their education increases. For example, if a woman is just maybe studied till graduate level, the fertility level is high. If the woman is postgraduate level, the fertility level is low. So somehow it gives a promising fact.
What do you say about the carbon footprints of those nations, Udit, where the fertility rate is the lowest? Let's talk about the US, let's talk about Europe. Obviously, right? The fertility factor there has come down to 2.1, 2.2, sometimes even below 2.0. So their carbon emissions must have surely now decreased, and they must be surely now very, very green countries. That's the thing with consumption. If you don't consume one thing, you will feast on something else. So there are the poor countries. They don't have goodies to feast on. They don't have gadgets and the buildings and the cars and all the goodies. So what do you find there? You have population there. And then you have countries where the population growth has been limited, yet there is unlimited carbon release. So it's not about population, it's not about gadgets, and it's not about vegetarianism or veganism. It is about man's fundamental tendency to see himself as incomplete and take care of that incompletion through consumption. Till you do not address that, man will consume. So you may have a man or a woman in Japan who is now empowered, literate, has all the means to take care of his or her fertility. So you don't find much population growth there, but has that, I'm asking you, resulted in an overall shrinking of the carbon footprint? Not at all. Because if you do not want to have happiness through kids, you will have happiness through gadgets. In fact, it is because you want to have more happiness through gadgets, so you refuse to have kids. You say, oh, kids are such a hassle. I want to live life and enjoy life and have the big life. So you don't have kids, but what are you doing? You are going ahead and exploiting the entire world and releasing carbon. You will release carbon in some way or the other. If not through begetting kids, then through doing something else. Don't you see that people are not refusing to have kids because they have become wiser? They are refusing to have kids because they want to have a more happy life, not a more wise life, not a wiser life, but a happier life. Further, if you rely on these things, yes, obviously the world population is going to stabilize by the end of this century. Today we are 8 billion, the population will stabilize at 11 billion. Will that make you happy? There is not going to be a fall. We are talking of still moving from 8.5, 8 to 11. We are not even 8.5, we are 8. We are at 8 and we are talking of moving to 11. And we were 2.5 in the 1950s or 1960s. From there we have come to 8 and we are traveling to 11. So it is not that literacy and material welfare and accessibility to birth control measures has a greatly positive effect when it comes to climate change. A country develops, the fertility rate falls, but the carbon footprint expands. Have you not seen it? The country develops, the fertility rate falls, but nevertheless the carbon footprint expands. So those who talk of population alone are mistaken. Those who talk of material consumption alone are mistaken. And those who talk of food habits and food choices alone are also mistaken, because none of them is seeing the bigger and total picture. None of them is seeing that eating animal flesh and feasting yourself on your wife's flesh repeatedly are somewhere the same thing. None of them are seeing that your tendency to go to the mall and buy the latest gadget and then go to the food court in the mall and have the most delectable meals is the same. Is it any coincidence that a shopping mall offers both? You can have everything nice to wear, you can have everything nice to watch, and you can have everything nice to eat. And we very well know that food choices are responsible for probably a third of all carbon emissions. Are they not? Where are food choices coming from? Food choices are coming from exactly the same place this uncontrolled population is coming from. Food choices are coming from exactly the same place our obsession with GDP growth is coming from. They are all coming from the center that says happiness can be had through more and more stuff. The stuff could be a kid in the family, the stuff could be the latest recipe on the internet, or the stuff could be the latest laptop in the market. But it's all about stuff. Nobody wants to talk about man's tendency to have stuff. And even if you don't want to go that deep because it becomes, uncomfortable, at least talk about the most important leg among these three legs, the one that we are deliberately ignoring. Talk about the taboo that living single is in most of the world still. Talk about the concept of the full nest that pervades the developing and the developed world much the same. I am there, I have a woman in my life, and I must have a couple of kids, That's what makes for a happy life. And obviously a house full of goodies to keep the 3 or 4 of us happy. That's global warming for you. The happy nest, the concept of the happy family.
It seems that in the upcoming episodes we won't be talking about global warming as such. We'll be dealing...
No, we need to talk about that, and we need to substantiate what we have just said with facts and figures. Otherwise it remains a mere man's opinion.
But Acharya, if the tendency to go out instead of looking in is there, what facts, what figures will convince?
At least we should know what is the result of going out. About that you can have facts and figures. I see Udit is already ready with so much. Surely these are not stuff or data pieces related to meditation. It's about what results when man proceeds on this wild adventure called the pursuit of happiness. Global warming is the result of our various pleasures and happinesses. Till the time we keep thinking that the objective of man's life is to be happy, and happy in an external way, you will have climate change and you will have this 6th or 7th mass extinction that is very much upon us.
But as we see, the timeline that we have to act is very small.
And that is why we must talk about the real thing. Half-hearted or superficial measures are not going to work now. You cannot have somebody set his AC to 22 instead of 16 and then feel proud that he is contributing to the climate movement. That is mere self-deception. All right. So we have to go to the core of the problem, see where everything is coming from, and there we might be able to discover something authentic. I don't know yet. I too will discover that as I speak to you in the course of this conversation, right? We have laid the foundation. We will inspect the foundation, we will check it, we will verify it, and then we will try to raise something on it, right?
But we do realize the magnitude of the project because the man is on a pleasure trip, and just amid the pleasure we are going to nudge him and say, dude, stop that.
Obviously. You need satisfaction. But if you are looking for it where you are currently looking for it, then the results will be what they currently are. We need to find out an alternative. And we don't need to just go berserk and blind. We need to substantiate every step with as much data as possible. All this needs to be shown and discussed and provided to the audiences who would be listening to this. Right? We'll be doing that. And yes, it's a good beginning. Let's carry forward it.